Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Hauler Talk. I am NASCAR's Mike Forde, joined, as always, by Amanda Ellis. Amanda, how you doing?
Hello.
And also joined by contributor extraordinaire, Nate Ryan. Nate, how you doing, my man?
Always good to contribute with you and Amanda Forde. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we are going a little bit multimedia. We are onto the YouTube platform now. So not only can you get us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, but also on the NASCAR YouTube page, so youtube.com/NASCAR. Highly encourage you to subscribe to the NASCAR YouTube page. You'll not only be able to listen to this podcast each and every week, but really the video content that NASCAR is turning out these days is really, really good. So, you know, you have Sunday's Inside the Race podcast, which is after every NASCAR Cup Series race. That is also on YouTube Live, and all the reruns are on there. But sometimes they do some pretty good stuff in the middle of the race, middle of the week as well. So, for instance, Steve Letarte had Dr. Eric Jacuzzi, NASCAR's lead aerodynamicist, on last week to talk about liftoffs. Going into Talladega, obviously that was a big storyline, potentially a concern. NASCAR has done a bunch of different things to kind of stop that, and there's more in the works to continue increasing the liftoff speed so these cars can stay on the ground. And so that discussion is on the YouTube channel as well, the NASCAR YouTube page, and that's really the only place you can view that. And so he breaks down several of the different instances where the cars did flip and have blowovers and get up in the air, and what we're doing to try to stop that. So really good information there. But long story short, Hauler Talk will now be on the YouTube page. So we're constantly evolving the show, and that's the next step. So pretty excited about that. So also excited to talk about the race weekend in Talladega, and lots of different things to break down from that race weekend. So, Nate, where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to give one more plug to the YouTube show, because I think a lot of people don't realize you can listen to podcasts just as well on your YouTube in the background than on a podcast app. Like when I'm here in my home office, I have on Inside the Race, I have Actions Detrimental. I listen to all those through YouTube. So if you ever want to know, hey, how can I listen to NASCAR's hottest new podcast, Hauler Talk, without having a smartphone in my hand and a podcast app, just go to YouTube now and you can listen to our podcast. And our most recent episode is on YouTube and got huge numbers, perhaps because we were talking about DQs, which unfortunately became a big storyline for Amanda after Sunday's race at Talladega. Runner-up, Ryan Preece, fifth place finisher, Joey Logano. Both were disqualified after the race at Talladega, unfortunately, in post-race inspections. I think we want to get to like what each team said, but I'll just kick it to both of you first and just explain why each of the cars was disqualified.
Okay, let's start with the 60. So since that was the highest up in the finishing order. So the 60 had one too many shims. So there is a rule in the rule book in the section 14, which is the technical portion of the rule book. And specifically, there's a line in the rule book that says for super speedways, you're only allowed 2 spoiler shims. And in post-race inspection, as a second place finisher, it also got torn down, and they have 3. This is probably, and so I was able to talk to Brandon Thomas, the VP of Vehicle Design for NASCAR, and shout out to Brandon. He always takes time for me before these podcasts to give me the straight dope, and pretty interesting conversation here, and pretty interesting background to this particular 60 appeal. So, or 60 penalty, which they did not appeal, but. So what happened when they go through pre-race inspection, the spoiler has to be at a certain angle, and they failed that particular template in pre-race inspection. So to correct that spoiler angle, they added a shim, and then were able to get through tech in pre-race and get onto the grid. We don't watch what they do when they try to fix. Once they fail, they go back to the garage, and then they have to go through every single station. So what they did is put in a shim and get the spoiler at the correct angle, and then they were able to qualify. I think this is one of the, I don't want to say rare times, but one of the rare examples. I'll say it is one of the rare examples where this was an honest mistake where I don't think they knew that particular rule was in the rule book. I hadn't talked to anyone from RFK Racing, but unfortunately at super speedway specifically, you're only allowed those two, and there were three. And so this is one of those where they didn't do it for a competitive advantage per se. They did it because they were probably looking for a competitive advantage pre-race going into inspection and hoping that spoiler would get through. It did not. And so their fix for it led to breaking a rule that led to an eventual DQ.
Well, and also just for context to the weekend, that inspection is actually held on Saturday. No,
it was Friday this weekend.
Friday this weekend.
Yeah.
So that inspection was on Friday, and then, ultimately they passed inspection based on the parameters for Friday. It's an impound after qualifying, and then essentially came to play in post-race on Sunday.
Yeah. So, unfortunate. Obviously, the 60 has been having a really good season, and it was for a couple hours at least, Ryan Preece's best career finish. Really good storyline, and there are a lot of stories that came out after the race, and he was happy about the finish, but also, as he said, he's a racer, and you always want to get that one extra spot. So, unfortunate. And after hearing the story of kind of how it all played out, even more unfortunate. But rules are rules, and obviously we have to follow them to keep an even playing field throughout the entire garage.
Okay. And before we get to Penske, we can just wrap up Penske the car being Joey Logano. Before we get to Logano's car, I think we can just wrap up RFK here. So you mentioned, Forde, that it did seem to be an honest mistake. The team's statement in which they said they would not be appealing, they said the infraction stemmed from an unintentional adjustment during pre-race inspection, as you just said, to correct a spoiler angle issue. While the change did not provide a competitive advantage, it did not meet the improved compliance method. So can you confirm or deny that part of it? There was no competitive advantage even from this?
So, according to Brandon, there was no competitive advantage. What you could probably argue, though, is that they were hoping for a competitive advantage leading into that opening inspection. So the spoiler angle, especially at super speedways, you want to take the spoiler away because you're going to have drag with that spoiler. So the angle was was such that they were trying to eliminate the drag, and so they added the shim to get it to the legal angle. And that extra shim is where they got caught. So in the race, so they race legal as far as the angle goes. So there was no competitive advantage of adding a shim doesn't make any speed.
Okay. And then the angle was an issue, though, with Joey Logano, his number 22 Ford, again, finishing fifth and then being DQ'd afterward in post-race. So Team Penske, as you said, elected not to appeal. They said one of the 18 bolts on the surface of the spoiler that connect to the base was found to be loose, and NASCAR penalized the team as a result. This was not intentional, Penske explained in that release, and said it happened throughout the course of the race event. Any thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, so it was a missing bolt, and it was a missing spoiler bolt. So when that happens, the spoiler can bend in race conditions. So they're saying that it was unintentional. That's fine. It was in an area that if that bolt did come out, it would gain a competitive advantage. So wink, wink on what you can think about that. It's funny. I was listening.
But traditionally, do teams come out and say, "Yep"?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
We definitely did that for a competitive advantage. They always say it's a non-competitive advantage.
Yeah. I was listening to Dave Moody yesterday on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, and he was talking about it. He's like, bolts never come out in the engine or brakes or anywhere that doesn't eventually lead to a competitive advantage. Not saying that this was. But so what it is there's a rule in the rule book that says all fasteners have to be securely fastened throughout the entire event, and this one wasn't on the spoiler. So fasteners for the spoiler, I should say. So this, like I said, a bolt was not securely fastened throughout the entire event, And we noticed that this wasn't a teardown situation. This was a visual inspection. The top 5 go through post-race inspection for as far as OSS, underbody scan, and then the weight platform. But as an official is always with the car, noticed that the bolt was loose, and then that led to the DQ.
Oh, sorry, just answering this text from Roger Penske for Mike Forde. No, just kidding. All right, so I think we've covered the disqualifications. Let's move on to the race itself. Unfortunately, had a pretty heavy wreck for Christopher Bell on a restart during this race, and a lot of people noticed he hit the inside wall, which I think it did have a safer barrier on it, but the wall itself kind of jutted out a little bit, and on the Inside the Race podcast, Jeff Burton, not just a long-time NASCAR and NBC analyst, but also a long-time safety advocate going back to his driving days, said he thought that would be fixed ahead of the fall race. It reminded me a little bit, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a crash, I think it was 2008 or 09 at Las Vegas, where Jeff Gordon hit a wall like that, similar, and Speedway Motorsports fixed it immediately. So did you guys have a chance to debrief or thoughts on that, the Bell wreck, and if something will be done to the Talladega wall?
Yes, Nate, to answer that question, that wall will be adjusted or, essentially corrected. Before we return in the fall, they're going to take that lip out and actually straighten it out and kind of straighten the wall as well. That leads into that and fix that area. And then there's an additional area of the track, too, that in our kind of recapping the weekend and looking at all the areas that will also be fixed before we return to Talladega in the fall.
Yeah, it's that wall. I think John Probst has called it. It seemed like it's a wreck magnet. For some reason, that area has been hit often. There is a wall there because there's an access road right behind it, where we have emergency vehicles stationed so that if there is a wreck on the back stretch, they can easily get there. So that's why that wall is there in the first place. But it's right now, I think, at a 5-degree angle. It might be even a little bit more than that. And so, planning that out and making it more of a straight edge should help as far as the significance that these wrecks lead to. So that's one of those things that we're going to fix over the summer, and then, like as Amanda said, be back in action for October. See a new wall there.
That's great. Great to hear that. And as I mentioned, we had disqualifications, unfortunately, after this race. We discussed that in last week's episode, how DQs work and everything like that. We also discussed last week a little bit pit speeding, or it might not have been last week, but in prior episodes, pit road and speeding penalties have kind of come up. And safety in the pits was a topic. At Talladega, you had number 77 tire changer being hit. You had 10 speeding penalties. We're going to start with both of those. What are you guys' thoughts on what we saw at Talladega in both those instances?
Well, pit road was busy, that's for sure. This weekend, I will say, before we would dive into that, I do think, I know we often reference Inside the Race, so I want to give them another shout out. Both Steve and Jeff, I thought, did a great job breaking down that pit stop with Carson Hocevar and, the pit crew member that was struck kind of during that pit stop. So I do encourage everyone to go and listen to that, because I think, they did a great job of kind of explaining from their experience how that can even occur. And so I just wanted to add that to that part of the conversation, that it is worth going back and watching what they describe and kind of how something like that happens. And they did note that they didn't feel like that was anyone's fault. It's just something that often transpires during, high pressure situations like Sunday, had.
Yeah, and so for the 77 in particular, I think, a couple things. As, Fox detailed at length, pit road is uber important under this era, if you will, of super speedway racing. So I think every team is getting every ounce of, not speed, but trying to gain every ounce of time on pit road that they can. So you take the 77 incident, pulled into his pit box and stopped. I think he was probably rushing to try to get there, so he was parked at a very awkward angle. How he parked was not illegal. That is, in the rule books, you are allowed, your right rear tire is allowed to be outside the pit box, and your team can pit. And then you look at the 21 that hit the tire, that hit the crew member, that how he came in. We introduced these orange boxes and lines on pit road maybe 2-3 years ago. And what that does is gives us a reference point. If a car is below that orange box, we know they are coming into their pit stall too shallow and potentially creating a dangerous situation for the team that's pitting in the pit box behind that, the pit stall in question. The 21 didn't. They ran over their box. They were far out. They were fine. And so that was not a penalty on either of the cars. So it was an unfortunate circumstance, and that's why we say, pit road is a dangerous place. That's why there's a lot of safety violations that can be called on pit road. That's why there is a pit road speed, and no one really did anything wrong there. The 77 pitted legally, the 21 pulled into their box legally, and that's kind of where we're at on that one. 10 speeding penalties. It's distance over time, as we talked about a couple times in Hauler Talk. And so, you don't have to, if you go over the pit road speed, that's not technically ultimately there's no speed radar gun that's going to be on these cars. It's distance over time. So as long as they slow down by the time they hit that second timing loop, then they'll be okay. But like I said, they're all trying to get push the limits, and that's why you saw, I think, so many speeding penalties on pit road, because gaining spots on pit road is so important, and that's why you'll see the fuel mileage and things like that phenomenon in super speedways as well. That's all about spending less time on pit road.
Yeah, Fox and Inside the Race did a good job, I thought, explaining that Austin Cindric essentially won that race because his rolling time, his final pit stop was very swift, but it was also because his rolling time, meaning getting in and out of the pits, was phenomenal. It was better than everybody else, and he went from like 25th or whatever to first after that last cycle, and stayed up front and won his first race of the 2025 season. And I think that kind of frames the speeding penalties, Forde, because like you were just saying, it's not if you go above the speed limit. It's can you maintain the average below the speed limit in each of the sectors in the pits at Talladega. And that's what Austin Cindric obviously did to maximum advantage on that last stop. And how many sectors are there at Talladega in the pits?
Ooh.
Probably.
You can just edit this weight out. I can give you the answer.
Sorry, I probably should have checked with you before we threw this at you. But if you don't have it, that's fine. We can just I got it. I can fix it. I can go back.
He's over here working on his computer.
Well, it's a great question, Dan. I'm glad I answered immediately. It is 18 segments on pit road. So it's probably one of the...
Even more than I would have thought. Okay.
Yeah, more. Yeah, it's probably one of the bigger pit roads as far as timing loops goes. There's usually, anywhere from, 13 to clearly 18. So Talladega is, I want to say, on the high end. So there's 18 sections on pit road at Talladega.
Yeah, I would have guessed a dozen. So there's 18 chances there for drivers basically to break the speed limit while they're in the pits, and that's why you end up with 10 speeding penalties at the biggest track on the circuit. So the last thing I think to address with the pits were big wreck. There was no big wreck, thankfully, in this 500-mile race at Talladega like we normally see. There was no crash that wiped out half the field or more. But there was a pretty significant one coming to the pits for green flag pit stops. It essentially took Brad Keselowski and Ryan Blaney out of contention, two guys who I think certainly were pre-race favorites. And when I watched this, I was struck by the fact that fuel conservation now has become such a never-ending narrative and cycle during these drafting track races that and what I heard from drivers after this instance was, I think it was Keselowski or Blaney, one of them said it, like, there's nothing we can do. It's just racing. That nobody was really at fault, which is what you hear during these really, really big multi-car wrecks at Talladega and Daytona. And I get it in that instance, that especially when they're racing for the win, I get that like there's nothing NASCAR, any of the drivers can do. If you're going to put a win out there and then ask them to race 3 inches apart at 200 miles an hour, in 10 rows, 3 wide deep. Like, I get there's nothing to do in that instance. But when we're talking about green flag stops in an era where, you said it, Forde, like pitting now is so essential to doing well at these tracks, is there anything maybe that NASCAR can do to help avoid the calamity that's starting to occur with these green flag stops? Because when I think about pit stops, I think about everything in the pits is predicated on safety. There are more rules governing that area of the racetrack than any other. So would entering the pits maybe fall into that same category? Is there anything NASCAR can do to kind of change that dynamic or make it somehow safer or easier so that drivers aren't running into each other when they're just trying to get fuel?
It's a good question. I don't think there is. I think this is I think we view pit road a little bit differently from everything pre-yellow line to yellow line. You know, there are so many humans on pit road that are wearing safety gear, but they are not inside a 3,600 pound stock car, that we do have those safety rules. So you could have, depending on this, 40 times 5 individuals on pit road, which obviously makes it a little bit dangerous. As far as, entering pit road on a green flag pit stop, any rules that can be made, I guess there could be. I just don't know. It's not something we're looking at. Let's put it that way. That's not something that has come as part of the post-race debrief. So there's nothing on the immediate horizon. Whether there's something where, like we talked about a few weeks ago, when Chase Elliott got dinged for getting out of line, you have to go single file. That's not the case, obviously, as you saw in green flag pit stops. You don't have to go single file. So is there something there? I feel like that would probably lead to more mayhem, though. So to answer your question, no, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's the team strategy. They don't have to do it that way. They choose to do it that way. So if they fail in executing that strategy, that's not something we probably would step in and try to, quote unquote, fix if it needs to be fixed.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I just have, for whatever reason, just a harder time kind of reconciling, drivers saying that they can't control chaos when they're entering the pits versus when they're racing for the win. But I get everything you're saying there makes sense in terms of yellow line. And I mean, hopefully that's something maybe we'll avoid seeing as much in the future if fuel saving becomes less emphasized at super speedways. But I don't know if that's necessarily in the cards either. I know NASCAR talked about that. I believe Elton Sawyer said that after the Daytona 500, that fuel conservation at super speedways was something they were kind of looking at maybe trying to de-emphasize, especially the biggest race of the year. Any progress on that or any thoughts on that post Talladega?
Yeah, there was some discussion about it. I know the drivers have come to us, at least one. I won't mention names, just nothing, outrageous. Amanda's talked about this so many times, and it's great. We, our competition leadership from John Probst, Elton Sawyer, and beyond are always willing to talk to the competitors and welcome those conversations. They push for drivers and crew chiefs and competition directors and owners to come into the hauler, and if there's anything on their mind to talk it out. So that has happened. At least one driver I just happened to pop into Scott Miller's office before this podcast, and Elton Sawyer had to be in there, and he was mentioning that a driver talked to him and had some thoughts on things that we can do. And there have been discussions of things like changing the size of the fuel cell. That seems like probably not the answer, just because as we'll get into later, the cost of something like that. I imagine that would be a significant cost increase. But is there something we can do with stages, changing the stage lengths, adding a fourth stage, for instance, which we do have at the Coke 600? That's not entirely apples to apples, since that is the longest race on the schedule, and every 100 laps there's a stage. But is that something that we look at, where we add a fourth stage so that there is no benefit from fuel saving? Things like that have been brought up. I don't think it's anything that's going to be happening, for Atlanta or Daytona too. But maybe, as more conversations happen within the garage, things change fast at NASCAR. So I could see something. If something happened, it wouldn't blow me away. I just don't think anything's imminent. At least that's the vibes I've been getting. But we're taping this on a Tuesday afternoon, and it's not. It's only 2 days after the race, so maybe more conversation will be had as after this is taped.
All right. Well, possibly more to come on that. Yeah, that was what I was asking about Forde. Like in terms of, it's to me, some of it is just a matter of like the stage lengths and teams being able to judge off of that. And I was asking you, I know earlier offline, just about could they make the fuel cell larger? Because I remember 2002, the first race I ever covered at Talladega, they actually made the fuel cells like 5 gallons smaller because they were trying to encourage more pit stops to break up the big packs. And so I know it's been used in the past, but your point's well taken on being cost conscious and how that impacts teams. And that actually brings us to our final discussion topic before we get to the guest today, and that is All-Star Race rules. We had a big discussion last week about the new format of the All-Star Race, and little did we know it was not going to be the big talker about the All-Star race, which is, of course, May 18th, North Wilkesboro Speedway. Next month, the old track hosting this big exhibition once again. And I'll give our friends at The Athletic, as always, some credit. They have a story out today as we tape this on a Tuesday afternoon saying why NASCAR teams said no to Run What You Brung All-Star Race idea. So I know Elton Sawyer also addressed this on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio today. Essentially, there was an idea floated out that teams could be allowed to, I guess, run essentially uninspected cars and just try what they want to do. The so-called Run What You Brung short track concept, which is essentially we're not going to police cars, we're not going to inspect them to a degree, maybe outside safety, and then just do what you want and see if you can win. And apparently teams just decline this offer. So what is the backstory, Amanda and Forde, that you can give us on all of this?
So, so this is, it's been I don't know, I feel like 2, 3, 4 weeks where we've mentioned Denny Hamlin's podcast. So I was so excited when Actions Detrimental dropped yesterday that we could finally talk about it, talk about Denny Hamlin again. No, but yes. So let me start from the start. We, in looking at the short track rules package, this is an idea born out of trying to improve that. And when you, as we've said several times in this podcast, testing is great and necessary, but it's not real world to the max. It's not 100% real world racing environment. So when you look at things as like the option tire, we can tire test all day long, but we don't get the true data point unless it's in race conditions. So that's why you saw things in North Wilkesboro last year, Richmond last year, and then Phoenix this year. So what we were hoping to accomplish with the quote unquote Run What You Brung idea was to have teams put it sort of more into the team's hands. And if we can see a particular car be able to run through the field easier, or even better yet, go from 5th to 3rd, then drop back to 6th, but make its way back up to 4th or higher, we'd be able to talk to those teams and say, okay, what was that? What did you do to your car? That's exactly what we're hoping to accomplish in Martinsville and Bristol and Richmond. We'd be able to get some ideas, and then we'd have a sheet of paper where we have all these ideas and build it out. So that's sort of the basis. That's the foundation of what this idea was. And so then we take step 2 of presenting it to the teams. Here's what we want to accomplish. So I think there were some miscommunications in some areas of the world of not from the NASCAR side. NASCAR did not miscommunicate this.
I was going to say, you're being very generous with your words.
Yeah, no, NASCAR was pretty clear. We have a tech meeting every 2 months with race teams where we talk about things we plan to do, what we're looking into, and we have a round table at the end where we open it up the floor, or we talk about things that are kind of philosophical, and we beat it up and take feedback. And one of the philosophical...
Well, really, that open table is it's for the purpose of the meeting, but anything can be discussed at the end of these calls, which we have periodically throughout the year. So continue.
Yeah. So it's during this round table, All-Star was brought up. And so the misnomer
But it had also been discussed prior to this meeting, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So this isn't the first time.
This isn't the first time they're hearing it. So this was on March 12th was the meeting. But prior to March 12th, there were discussions with team owners about this. This meeting on March 12th was the competition directors, and that's where some of the concerns was raised. Denny talked about how this would cost potentially $2 million if we went ahead and did this. I think his math was off by about $2 million, but what actually it could cost is $0 or potentially save teams money, believe it or not. And I'm sorry, Denny, but I did text with Denny. I told him you can listen to NASCAR's hottest new podcast on Wednesday for all the goods. But so
let's be real, he doesn't listen.
What
to
is
our
no?
podcast.
He's going to watch on YouTube.
Exactly, Nate. Yes.
So his reasoning, what he threw out there was that if the car costs $300,000. He has 3 cars. We would destroy every single part in that car, trying to make it the best they can by modifying every part to its max ability. So that's $300,000 times 3. So $900,000 worth of parts that are now obsolete because they can't be used anywhere else except the All-Star race. Part 2 would be they'd be CNCing parts, creating parts, making new parts, with their partners at Joe Gibbs Racing, which would cost another $1 million. All told, all put in almost $2 million just for this one race that only pays, quote unquote, only $1 million to the winner. So that's incorrect. So what we presented to the teams is you cannot modify any parts. You cannot build new parts. You can't create any new parts. Everything still had to be single sourced. But there was a list of things that we were going to allow teams to do. One of the things Denny mentioned, he's like, I wish we, if it was just something like you can change the ride heights. Well, that was one of them. One of the things was damper lengths were not going to be enforced. Right now, there is a platform in the pre-race inspection where the dampers are measured and they have to be at a certain length. We were not going to measure those for this race. So you could do your ride heights however you'd like. Total and right side weight would be enforced, but the nose weight you can make that whatever you want. You can use whatever diffuser you wanted. So right now there's 2 different diffusers, one for the short tracks, one's for intermediate. Actually, I think intermediate and super speedway I believe are the same. So you could use either one of those floors that you wanted to. You can use underbody stuffers or strakes; those are optional, or you could not use it. But it had to be used. It had to be an existing single source part. The spoiler base can be any single source spoiler base with any of the existing single source poly spoilers could be used. So you can mix and match the spoilers that you wanted. So whatever spoiler, whether it's if you wanted to use your super speedway spoiler, you want to use your short stack, your intermediate, whatever spoiler height you wanted to use that's already in production, that you already have as part of your inventory, those could be used as well. So there were so many different things that the teams could look at, mix and match, and all of which would have already been in the inventory. And part 2 about this, and why I said teams actually probably could have saved money on this idea, is if you didn't want to do anything, if you wanted to not come up with any idea, you can just build your cars. What you could have done is use body panels that probably aren't race ready for a Talladega or a Coke 600, but probably too good for a show car, and use it for the All-Star race. So you could have used sort of like hand-me-downs, which they do now, but if it's hand-me-downs that is not up to snuff for a points race, you could use it there and actually save some money.
The teams aren't going to do that.
The teams are not going to do that,
No.
But maybe a smaller team would.
Would they come back and say, well, no, we're not going to use those hand-me-downs because that'll hurt performance, like even If they're better than a show car, but not as good as a race car, that's
I'm
what
sure.
they'd say.
Yeah. So they probably wouldn't do that, but they could if they wanted to. And so why I am mentioning Denny so much here, this is the second week in a row where, and I would say this to him to his face, where he claimed that there wasn't that much thought put into this, which I can tell you is absolutely not true. There was a working group working on these ideas for months. And so there was a lot of thought put into this. And as you listened to in the first episode of Hauler Talk, Steve O'Donnell, who's now the president, is very conscious of costing teams more money. And that thought trickles down throughout the organization. And so we're not going to make rules that will cost the teams a ton of money. That's just not what we do. So where I will give why this is not happening, and if you read, I'm glad, Nate, you kind of gave the shout out to the athletic story. A lot of the quotes from the competition directors really don't focus on cost all that much. I think that, maybe a little bit here or there, but they looked at it as more of a distraction, which I think is a fair one.
Right.
And when I was talking to Brandon,
like how can we focus resources on an all-star exhibition race? It's going to take more time and effort, and we need to worry about making the playoffs rather than this exhibition race.
So in talking to Brandon, I said, I said to him, okay, unless you don't have the right facts, how does cost come into this? And because so wind tunnel time is strictly regulated. CFD runs are strictly regulated. So you're not going to blow those hours and runs on the all-star race. So you're not doing that. So there's no cost. There would be cost if you did that. That's not going to be a cost. So what's the point? He's like, well, if I was a crew chief, which he was a crew chief prior to his current position, I'd be worried about walking onto the shop floor and looking at my guys, busting their butts to try to come up with ideas. And then this guy has one idea, this girl has a different idea. Well, which idea do we go? Let's whiteboard all these ideas, all for the all-star race when you have, a crown jewel Coke 600 coming up down the pike. 2 races after that, you have the very first International Cup points race in Mexico City. So you have to, all the focus that should be going to trying to make the playoffs, to your point, Nate, is focused on the all-star race. So that did hold a lot of water for us, and that's ultimately, I think, that. And there were owners owners and competition directors who were worried about the cost as well.
But also, I think there was a general reality here of everyone on these calls is, and we can't get into the specifics of the calls because they're, confidential in a way, but everyone on that call is a racer.
Yeah. And
the other element of this is like, when I felt like, and correct me if I'm off base here, Forde, but I felt like as that call continued and those discussions were had, it was like, if I can't guarantee to be number one, if I can't guarantee to figure this out and bring the absolute best vehicle with all the things we can do, with all the things, like, I don't even want to try. Like, that's, and I'm not saying that in a negative way. They're racers by heart. And if they can't
and that's why they're at this level
and be guaranteed, like, to be badass in the way that they want to be, then I don't think that they want, I don't want to imply they didn't want to do it, but it just wasn't worth the effort, and to your point, in the timing and the schedule that was at play.
Yeah. And I think Denny mentioned that too, is that we're there, and as we were talking about earlier, they're not going to use the hand-me-down parts. They're not going to just put the car that they think might be the best and have one idea and build it and roll it out and then good luck.
Which I kind of get all that, but going to Amanda's point, this is where I struggle with this. Is I find like their logic, and I'm not trying to put this on the teams. This is more of like a racing
philosophy.
That's
my job, Nate. Don't forget, you don't put anything on the teams. I put things on the teams.
I just feel like there's this contradictory thing of, and you're right, it's the racer's mentality. They want the absolute best. Like, we're not going to do this, we're not going to agree to this unless we get exactly what we want. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, you're only paying $1 million. You've been paying $1 million for like 20 years. And, it doesn't really count for the playoffs. We got other things. like, it's like they want to have it both ways. Like on one hand, it's like, well, we're not going to put our all out effort into this unless like you agree to this, and this. But on the other hand, you're also not giving us like 2 million, 3 million, whatever the grand prize should be. So like, why should we put this effort in anyway? Like, it's just like they're coming at it like, and I sort of understand it, but the way they're explaining it, I feel like they come from like diametrically opposed logic reasoning here that makes me struggle to kind of square all of it. But anyway, I just have two more things just real quick.
Welcome to NASCAR.
Tell me,
that is exactly.
Yeah, I've only been around this for like almost 3 decades. I think I figured some of this out by now.
Yeah, it is. I'll get to your question, but again, it is a bummer that this would have been a really good opportunity to test a few things and have some real world data. I think that's the most unfortunate part.
So 2 things, and you guys might not know the answers to this, or you can't say, and in either of those cases, just tell me to buzz off. Like, you don't need to give me full answers. But part of the rationale here that we heard from Hamlin and teams were that I think they get 7 chassis per year. Is that right?
That's right.
Was there any sort of stipulation made that like you guys would, hey, everybody gets a free chassis if we do this and run this race, or something like that?
No, so that's not that. He was wrong there too. So that was if he was under the impression that you can manipulate the chassis, which you would not be allowed to do.
Oh, okay.
So he's saying, so NASCAR wants us to do whatever we want. So one of the things we'd want to do is to destroy a chassis, manipulate it, modify it to whatever we think is best, and now we'd be out of chassis for the year.
And
you wouldn't be allowed to do that.
And then the literal $1 million question, or really $64,000 question, if you use 60s quiz show vernacular, $1 million to win this race. Was that discussed at all? That obviously there's some grumbling here that maybe it hasn't really kept pace with inflation, cost of living. Like, was there any sort of discussion of like, yeah, we'll do run what you brung if you up the purse, or is that a Speedway Motorsports discussion separate from NASCAR? Anything you can give us there?
No. In the meetings, no one said, "Hey, how we'd be open to this if you up the purse." That never came up. Whether upping the purse has ever been discussed, I don't know. That probably would be more of a Speedway Motorsports question.
I did joke though when I listened to Actions Detrimental and Denny's segment on the All-Star race, and he was talking about modified parts and doing this, and they'd have to do this, and I texted Forde and I said, well, maybe now the fans will understand how we ended up with a next-gen car.
Yeah. I mean, but it's I don't want to gloss over that.
Like,
that
this
point.
is how we got to where we are now.
That is so true. It's like, his conversation was a microcosm of why the next-gen car exists in the first place, because when you give teams, when Pandora's box is open and give teams the chance to be innovative, they are going to become manufacturing plants, and that's one of the reasons why the next-gen car came into being, because there was a chance that we had a team owner that say that this one race could cost $2 million, and obviously that's not something we can allow.
All right, that puts a bow on Talladega, our most recent DQs, which we hope is not a continued thing for the 3rd week in a row. And ultimately, closing the book on the All-Star race for a couple weeks before we have to reopen that. But at least at that point, we'll have enjoyed the All-Star weekend, and we'll have something new to talk about. So, Nate, as always, thank you for joining us and for holding us accountable in these discussions. And we appreciate the time that we get to spend with you.
It was fun. Enjoyed it. Talk to you guys next week.
All right. And up next, we are going to be joined by Chase Brashears, who's the Director of Track Services. I'm really excited about this conversation that we were able to have with Chase, because I think it really shows fans a unique part of how NASCAR operates at the track. And Chase is someone who is very experienced in that and really brings the fans kind of inside, I guess you could say, the truck, so to speak, because that's a lot of where his vantage point is. So coming up next, we have Chase Brashears.
All right, we're now joined by NASCAR's Director of Track Services, and that is Chase Brashears. Chase, how you doing, bud?
I'm great, Forde. How are you?
I'm good. So Chase, in his role, is the oversees the whole group that is kind of the emergency services group. So what is that? I'm going to ask Chase that question. What does your group do from A to Z? There's it's not just. There's so many things that go into your group, actually. So how about you take us through what exactly your group does?
For sure. There are definitely a lot of things that go into our group. So here at NASCAR, the NASCAR Track Services internally at NASCAR, as far as competition, there's about 18 of us on that team. We travel in different groups, track to track, for event execution. So at the actual racetrack, we're the go-betweens between NASCAR competition and the venue. And then there's also... that same group also does training events at tracks all across the country that host NASCAR events. So this past weekend, we're in Talladega doing the race events, right? But we also have a group in Indianapolis getting ready for their upcoming weekend doing training, and at the same time in Michigan getting ready for their upcoming event as well. So we do all of that. We also manage all of the kind of programs that go along with NASCAR's track services. So track drying, the Air Tundra program, all of those things. The recovery program with steps, and just all of those different entities and operations that we have going on. So there's 18 of us in-house, like I said, and then there's like roughly 6,500 track services members across the industry or so. And while all those people don't directly work for us, they work for the individual venues, and we're the go-betweens that set those standards and make sure all those are held accountable when we roll up to the event.
And Chase, you mentioned one thing. You mentioned the STEPS recovery program, or that almost sounds like it's like... I was trying to make a joke. No one followed that joke, so that did not land well. But the STEPS recovery program is actually when a car is essentially hooked out on the racetrack and taken to somewhere, the garage, pit road, something of that nature. But STEPS is a relationship that we've had for a couple years now. But before that, it was actually individually based, and now it's a consistent group that works across the schedule, correct?
Absolutely correct. So before, and kind of how each track each track has their own track services team, like I just mentioned. So that's everything from fire to EMS and ambulances, cleanup and restoration equipment, and a lot of the tracks work together, especially when you go to bigger racetracks. So, but recovery or tow trucks or wreckers, depending on how you want to phrase it, used to be each individual track controlled that, right? When the next gen car came about, recovery became much more of a topic because honestly, it's one of the slowest things that we do, right? Because you're having to stop, hook up the vehicle, drag a damaged vehicle back, which obviously moves much slower. So when the next gen car came about, it's been a goal of ours, and you can ask Derek Thomas or anybody like that cautions, folks enjoy cautions, right? And them happening and re-racking the field, they don't enjoy them taking a long time. So it's our goal to safely and efficiently conduct the event, and obviously with that efficiency comes we need to be quick. So we found that just as we travel track to track, that if we could find a recovery program that we could take track to track, they would be trained, obviously, but they would also have each and every weekend to execute that, which really adds to efficiency, really makes things faster. And then the race teams honestly get familiar faces each week if their cars are damaged. I mean, it's not always great to see a familiar face in that case, but those folks know how to handle those cars a lot better than somebody that may only see the car once or twice a year.
So let's go back to that. So the sort of the newsy hook for this past weekend, a lot of discussion in the media center, stemming off the October race, which was, were you at the October race, by the way, in Talladega?
I was not, but I know what happened.
So 28 car wreck, and obviously it took a while to obviously get every car back to pit road or into the garage or wherever it was being taken. So a big topic in the media center. I think several drivers were asked. Bob Pockris was asking several of the drivers of, do you wish there was a way that NASCAR could prioritize cars? Is that possible?
I don't think it's logistically possible a way that would be remotely fair. You mentioned the October race. There was 28 cars, right?
Yeah,
28 cars in it. We have on site at Talladega We have 7 wreckers or tow trucks and 3 rollbacks. So that's 10 pieces of equipment total
Right.
for, and the rollbacks largely take too long to dispatch. So really you're looking at 7 pieces of equipment, which Daytona Talladega are the largest amount of equipment we have in that regard. Because
What's the
they're so big.
smallest?
The smallest would be really like Bowman Gray, which is, Bowman Gray is 2, 3 wreckers, or 2 wreckers and 1 rollback. So
Yeah.
just because of the size of
Right.
it. So, but Daytona and Talladega are really large venues, so lots of ground to cover. But still, yet in that, that's only at a max 8 to 10 pieces of equipment to deal with 28 cars. And then you have to think about it like a wreck on the highway, right? You can't get to the center of the incident to clean it up until you clean up everything that's around the outside ring of it. So really no way to do it fairly. You send the tow truck, the closest tow truck grabs the closest car, the first one they can get to, and we just go from there and keep cleaning it up.
I love that analogy. Like kind of, yeah. If there's, you got to go one at a time if you're on a big wreck in the highway. So that's kind of the same thing. You just got to, and to your point, and so he mentioned Derek Thomas. We've mentioned him in the podcast before. Derek Thomas is our sort of fan feedback analyst. So he goes through all the data from the fan council and hears what the fans think about each race and how we do things. And one of the things, as he just said, was they don't like when caution periods take too long and too many laps are burned. If we did prioritize drivers and cars, holy cow, that would just take forever. That would be, if you thought it was going to be, if you think sometimes cautions take too long, now, if there was a method to, okay, who's first in points? Okay, Logano or Byron. All right, let's get the 24. We got to dig through there, get the 24 out first. It sounds great in theory on paper, but to your point, it just doesn't seem like it could be possible.
Well, despite what sometimes fans will say in their frustration, you guys are not pulling up the point standings. You don't have time to determine who's the most popular driver available to pick up. It is truly one of those things where
what's the vote last
you
year?
immediately go into really you're already in work mode. I mean, I don't want to imply that you're not in work mode, but like when an incident happens, you guys just roll into the next thing that you're supposed to be doing. And like you said, in the process of cleaning every, incident up and putting people on a tow truck or however it may be, you guys are approaching it from a very processed, base standpoint. Definitely don't have time to think about anything related to where a driver might stand in the point standing.
Yeah, I have plenty of comical mental pictures in my head when you guys mentioned going off points, but absolutely, wrecks happen and we go into work mode to your point, right? And we got to clean it up safely and efficiently and however we need to do that. Largely what we do is super fast. I mean, compared to highway recovery and cleanup or anything like that, what we do is super fast.
Yep.
Since the advent of the next gen car, we don't even lift hoods on cars to recover anymore. We have a great group with BA Products that made this. Some people call it a spreader bar. It's technically called a lift beam. It goes on the tow trucks. We run it through the wheels of the race vehicles. So we don't even largely lift hoods anymore unless, the wheels are obviously completely destroyed or gone. So you can hook up a car in a matter of seconds and move forward with it. So it's easiest to just grab what's closest and just move on and keep digging from there.
So I know I don't think you're are you ever in the doctor's car?
Yes. So with AMR, we have in the safety team, we have multiple chase vehicles with NASCAR personnel and somebody from AMR. We have at least one doctor in one chase vehicle and then paramedics in the other. We run 2 chase vehicles at every track. Sometimes we run 3, but those are where the AMR doctors and paramedics come from, as well as what AMR supplies in the care center. So
we see on TV what happens when there's a wreck and you see the chase trucks come up and rush the incident. So take us from, you're literally behind the wheel when that happens. So the 88 Connor Zillage, big gigantic wreck on Saturday. And then we see another big wreck on Sunday with Christopher Bell. What happened? So what do you hear in your ear? What do you do? Where are you stationed? Or how does that all work? What's the choreography that goes into going to a wreck of seemingly high significance?
For sure. So this past weekend at Talladega, we had 3 NASCAR AMR safety team chase vehicles there. Turn 1, just past start finish, really, off of turn 2, and then at the entrance to pit road. So how an incident plays out is obviously the race director who's controlling the race also has the cleanup equipment on with him, and then with him working in tandem is the emergency services coordinator, which there's 3 of us that do that job as well. So once the race director displays the caution, the emergency services coordinator then immediately goes into dispatching. Like at Talladega, he had roughly 50-some pieces of equipment that he can dispatch, which is quite a bit of equipment, obviously. So he immediately goes into dispatcher mode, right? He sees the incident, he's feeding off of what the race director has done, and he starts moving equipment. So in our ears in the chase vehicles, we can hear the race director, but our priority at that point is the emergency services coordinator, which we hear in the other ear. Case in point, at Talladega, I was actually in chase 2 off of turn 2 when the 2017 crash happened back there. Obviously, as you mentioned, really hard impact. Same thing on Saturday with the Connor Zilic crash. So chase 2 has one of the AMR paramedics in it. Chase 1 has the doctor, and like I said, chase 1 is just past start finish. As soon as that happens, the emergency service coordinator dispatches the chase vehicle. You're talking maybe just a matter of seconds before that person is there, a few more seconds before the second chase vehicle is there, and at the same time, there's a full complement of other equipment, fire trucks, ambulances rolling in that direction. So that's largely how that goes. The emergency services coordinator is watching and dispatching all of that. And then from there, when we get on site, we'll communicate back and forth. And it's just a conversation across the radio if we need anything additional, any updates that are needed, and largely it's just a conversation.
Are you talking to the driver, or is that primarily the doctor's talking to him?
We'll make some initial contact, but largely that's the doctor and any of the medicals, the paramedics that do that initial. If there's an issue, they will let us know, and then we'll start communicating to race control. But any initial medical or initial driver contact, as we call it, literally really is by the medical professionals, and we're the go-betweens. Our job is largely command and to make sure everything continues to flow forward.
So one of the things that makes, not just your position unique, but makes you unique in this position is that you also served as a race director. You are often in the tower as well from, your current position. But then you also, ride in the chase truck just like you described. And having kind of a vantage point from all of those angles is maybe not something we've always done at NASCAR. I think this kind of came together more in recent years. But just talk a little bit about, how you've learned from having all of those vantage points. How does that work together? And probably ultimately, how does it make you better because you have, you're able to see things through kind of various lenses?
Absolutely. So overall, the credit goes to the team, right? The credit doesn't go to me. But to your point, the more experience you have at doing things, and that's what we've found in recent years, is largely better. So it allows you to have a little bit larger picture of, if you're on the ground, you understand what's coming, what the race director needs to accomplish on his side. So if you can't get all of the stuff cleaned up at once, you can at least move it to a place where he can open pit road or get cars off of pit road or whatever he needs to do to keep the race flowing. No different as the emergency services coordinator. If you experience being in the truck for a while, you understand what those guys are seeing, how you can communicate better and more clearly for them to do their job and move that forward. So it's a really cool job. Like today, I go from being in the office doing a bunch of meetings and admin work. This past weekend, I was, on the ground, obviously, in one of the chase vehicles, and then I think in Kansas and North Wilkesboro, I'll be in the tower doing some race directing. So it's largely to get that experience, and I've just always been that way throughout my career. I don't like to be able to judge people that work for me or anything unless I can do the job. Now, they can largely do it better, but it's great to have that full breadth of experience. So
when, I believe, earlier this year, you were in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. I think we were both in Atlanta, actually. So we had an incident in Atlanta that I kind of wanted to bring up, and it happened in the truck race, and we had the speedy dry to clean up the incident, and then there was the element where the speedy dry kind of got blown at the wrong time, so to speak. Yeah. And then also, when things like that happen, I'm really using Atlanta as an example, so I want to clarify that, but it's kind of one of those things where, whether it be sometimes the TV broadcast or the radio broadcast or the media who are in attendance or, essentially social media all blows up. And the number one thing that people will say is, what are they doing? They don't know what they're doing. And the reality is that's really never the case. There's always things that go into play. So if you want to explain a little bit about Atlanta, you definitely can. We did touch on that a little bit during that episode. But ultimately, what is happening when it's easy for fans to say they don't know what they're doing or they're taking too long? The reality is oftentimes you guys are still doing everything you can to get that racetrack ready for those laps that are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody out there out of the, like I said, largely nearly 6,500 track services personnel throughout the industry doesn't know what they're doing, right? Everybody has a ton of experience. Largely, a lot of them are professional firefighters at some point in their lives. So they all know what they're doing. The case in Atlanta was just a simple miscommunication that the jet dryer was throttled up before it should have been. And again, like you're listening to a lot in your head, literally, and then you're also out there within a couple of feet of race cars or race trucks in that instance, and that was just a miscommunication, kind of some tunnel vision and unfortunate. And it's definitely, it does look easy a lot of times, and I'm guilty of that too, right? I can stand up in race control and be like, what are we doing? But the job is hard. Like, you don't know on the ground if there's broken brake rotor everywhere. Things are extremely hot when they're trying to pick up cars, so you never know like what's going on and what's taking a little extra time. So same thing we've had at Rockingham where we had to stop for a minute so we could repair something. It's just, it does take some time. We are moving as absolutely fast as we can, but sometimes it does take time. Sometimes equipment breaks and sometimes things go wrong, but we try to recover from that.
And you guys, I don't know if we've ever really dove into the track walk on the show yet.
Oh, yeah,
but,
I don't think we have.
But maybe talk about that a little bit. So prior to each race weekend, you and your team walk the entire racetrack, checking every piece of safer foam, every wall, every nook and cranny of the racetrack. What is, obviously that probably takes, at a 2.66 mile track, this is probably the longest one you got. How long did that take you?
Do you guys travel in on Thursday? Typically
yeah,
Thursdays?
generally the day
so
before
you come
on
in
track.
The day before on track.
Yeah,
okay.
Generally the day before on track activity. We work closely with Jerry Caproth from Track Development, who manages a lot of the larger construction projects in advance, and then we kind of take over on race week. To your point, Talladega does take a while. Bristol and Bowman Gray and Martinsville are great track walks. Talladega, especially if it's a warm Alabama day, that one can be rough, and Daytona in the summer can be. So it does take a while because you're spreading out right across 6-8 people depending on who's there, as well as any reps from the track, and you're just literally spread out at the start finish line, and you walk the entire 2.66 miles. You check everything that you can check, from asphalt to grass to the safer barrier, like you mentioned, to fences to caution lights and just everything. So it can take, especially at a place like Talladega, you're looking at hours to accomplish all of that stuff.
Oof. God bless you. Yeah, I saw Suarez did that jog around that we're doing on social media.
Yeah.
Pass on that.
But yeah, they definitely did not
pass on walking to in 2.66 miles anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and I also think one thing so you mentioned you guys come in on Thursday. You mentioned you have the track walk. Once you guys have the track walk and you determine what needs to be fixed, then and listen, there are things sometimes that need to be fixed before we can allow on track. You guys make sure that stuff is up to speed before we ever would let anybody on the track. But then throughout the weekend, I think a lot of people don't quite realize what kind of takes place. So before a race, after a race, obviously, we're on certain email lists and things where we get updates. But once we take the checkered flag, you guys almost have another layer of your job that kicks in, and that requires you to go back around the track to a degree where you guys check everything to make sure that that race didn't cause something that we need to now address before we start the next day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, when we roll into a track, like the tracks have a set of standards and guidelines that they're to prepare the facility by, right? Largely, there's very minimal stuff on the list. The tracks do a great job, their operations team. I mean, 2.66 miles at Talladega times that multiple times because you're checking multiple areas of 2.66 miles. Very minimal things on the list. And they do all the racetracks really do a great job in that. To your point, yes, during the race, we actually also check. So like at Rockingham, I mentioned we had to stop. We found something in the middle of a race that had happened during an incident that we had to quickly take care of. So, but in any case, we'll check that immediate area when an incident happens, right? From wall contacts to surface gouges or anything that may need taken care of in the immediate during the race. But then after the race, we'll also go back and do a very deep dive into those things and see, do we need to patch something? Do we need to grind down a part of the surface to get rid of a leading edge or anything? So we'll go back and check those areas, especially ones that have had a significant impact, like at the end of the Xfinity race. And then sometimes we have to do our favorite thing, which is actually to rewash and clean and tidy up oil spills that have occurred or fluid spills that have occurred at any point throughout the race.
Are you still using Tide for that?
We use some sort of detergent or dishwashing detergent or something. Nothing with like fabric softener or anything in it. It makes it so just your standard like detergent of some sort that doesn't have any sort of additive to it.
That does seem like the most stressful, maybe not stressful. Stressful is not the right word. Annoying problem in race control is major oil spills.
It is. Absolutely. It's largely complex at times to clean it up, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we do have several of those sometimes. Like it's part of racing, but there are some races where I'm sure you guys are like, all right, that's it. We've done enough today. We do not need any more oil spills.
Yeah, that's one of the many beauties of the next gen. You don't see oil spills that much.
Absolutely. There was an event recently that we had to, before the next day, we had to make sure that the track acquired some additional because we went through so much
really
cleanup products. So awesome. Largely it's not the Cup Series. So thankfully with the next gen car, that's our favorite. So, but as far as that,
we might could guess what race that was.
Yes.
If I had to guess what I think that race was one we talked about a lot here on Holler Talk. Also, like I wanted to bring up that you were at NASCAR, and then around, I think it was like middle of 2020, you had the opportunity to go, and I may be off on my year, so correct me there if I am, but you had the opportunity to go and be part of the management team at South Boston. And that's really where you spent your time before you rejoined us here in the NASCAR land. But I wanted to just ask you, like, what was that experience like? And also, like, how were you able to use what you learned there during the years that, you spent at South Boston, and how does that apply in your role today?
Absolutely. You're right. It was at the end of 2020. So I came out of college, went straight to NASCAR for several years, and then had the opportunity to go to South Boston Speedway, which is owned by Pocono Raceway. Absolutely incredible experience, incredible group. And that was during 2020, obviously right at the height of the pandemic. So a lot of people had personal things that came up. I was one of those and just had an opportunity that was at the right time. And I've been really blessed to have some incredible opportunities. But after 3 years, I believe there, I came back here to NASCAR, and that opportunity largely, it probably calmed me down and matured me a little bit, because that's you're doing literally everything there, from doing the management stuff to working with the operations guys. If they're behind mowing grass, painting walls, which was great, and probably goes back to your question earlier as to why I enjoy balancing roles. But it honestly gave me a little bit more perspective with when we're dealing with the actual racetracks themselves, right? Like there's a ton of work to get done here, not just the competition stuff is only a part of it, right? That we're looking at in the racetrack. Like they have massive facilities that they're working with and dealing with from all different assets of their group and their company, and then we roll into town and just add to that. So it's probably honestly one of the biggest things was a little more perspective on what they go through to prepare for us on the competition side, but then just prepare for, in general, the NASCAR industry. So
before we let you go, I wanted to, obviously, we touched a little bit on Talladega at the beginning of our time with you, but Connor Zilic was involved in an incident at the, toward the end of the Xfinity race on Saturday. Can you just to give fans a visual, the best you can, within what you can share, can you take fans through, like, what happened? So let's just say right now, Connor's in the lead. He hasn't quite been turned yet. He gets turned. That incident occurs. Like, kind of take the fans through the role that you're in, from that standpoint until you guys are able to get him out and, essentially onto the care center.
Absolutely. So obviously it's Talladega, right? And it's coming down to the last lap. We know that there's potential for stuff to come. So everything is
You're
ready.
getting ready.
Everything is ready to go, I assure you. Like everybody is probably in gear and one foot on the gas and one on the brake, ready to go. But again, that goes back to the emergency services coordinator and race control. Like as soon as he sees that happening, he's waiting on the race director to throw the caution, which they did immediately because of the impact. And as soon as that happens, we are dispatched onto the racetrack. So they're within a matter of seconds.
How fast are you guys going once you get clearance to start? Do you mash the gas and
absolutely,
you're going
as fast as we run Ford F-150s, thanks to Ford. So absolutely, as fast as they will go, we will get there. At Talladega, I mean, you can get up into, I think they govern out around 103. I don't know if I'm able to say that. You may have to edit that out.
It's all right. We say a lot of things on this podcast that maybe we should edit out.
As fast as we can get there. So that puts medical personnel there, that puts us there, and then following us as fast as they can are racetrack supplied ambulances and fire trucks. And when I say fire trucks, I don't mean like fire engines. I mean pickup trucks that are specific for what we do. So we get out, like I said, we make that initial driver contact with the medical side. With that medical side in that case, because we know how hard of an impact that is, like we're already amped up for whatever may occur. So we're immediately talking to the emergency services coordinator and race control, telling them if we need anything. And he's going ahead, and we're having that conversation to go ahead and dispatch additional assets in case we have to get into something else that we're prepared. Obviously, Connor got out of the car there and was taken to the care center. So huge kudos to Safer Barrier and the folks in engineering and all that do that. But that's how we respond. We're immediately going, and as soon as we get there, we'll start the communication process to let with the driver, but also back to race control.
One of I always think one of the most interesting moments that you guys have to encounter, and from the tower, this is also like you can hear part of the conversation, but you can't necessarily hear all the conversation. But is when a driver is needed to get out because their day is essentially done and they will not get out of the car, and you guys have to sit there and negotiate with them, and you'll, sometimes you'll be like, driver of the, whatever, won't get out of the car. They're saying they're not going to get out of the car. They refuse to get out of the car. And then, you guys are in that situation on the ground to kind of negotiate with them and come to a place of understanding. And it is always, slightly entertaining when you're just sitting there listening to all that going on. And I think a little bit of those in-car cameras now, at least related to Cup, and obviously the DVP policy's adjusted a bit, but the in-car cameras now, I think they can even hear a little bit more of those conversations than they could prior, so that can create some entertaining clips as well.
It can. And it sounds like we're yelling and they're yelling, but like we're wearing full face helmets with earbuds. They're wearing full face helmets with earbuds. There's cars going by, so you are yelling to the top of your lungs at one another to like try to... It can be entertaining for sure, especially looking back on it. In the moment, they are not happy, and we get that. Like when they see us in the middle of the race, they are probably not excited to see us, and that's okay. We wouldn't be in their situation either. I mean, it's fun for us. That's what we get paid for, right? Is to get the race back going. But it is definitely entertaining, especially looking back on it. There are definitely some fun stories that come out of it.
Well, there are hundreds of jobs in the NASCAR industry that I know I could never do, and yours is near the top of that for sure. So thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do week to week. It's when I get to, Amanda and I have the privilege of sitting in race control and seeing all that action go on in real time, and it's a stressful time, for us because, we're on the comm side and we want to make sure everything goes well. And, but gosh, you're literally dealing, with people's health, and that's a major thing. So, well done. Congrats on the new role here. You're 10 Cup races old into this thing, 11 races in the Xfinity Series. So, and been doing a killer job. So, thank you for being here, Chase, and good luck the rest of the season, my man.
Thanks, I appreciate it. For the record, we really appreciate what you guys do to tell our story, even when we do it wrong. So, we wouldn't want your jobs either. So, I appreciate it. We appreciate all that you guys do.
We appreciate you guys being willing to sit down with us and explain everything, so we can share with our listeners. Yeah, so I agree all around that you guys do an incredible job, and thank you for being willing to help us share it with the listeners. So, for it up next, we have fan questions. So, friendly reminder to all of our listeners, please continue to tag us or send us questions. Actually, these two were kind of ones that I was tagged. We were tagged in one of them, and then I also saw one of the questions referenced, so I made sure I screenshotted it and saved it for today. So our first question is from Alan Marsh, and he tagged us in this question over the weekend, and unfortunately, we did not have a chance to get back with him. It is, I'm here at the Cup race at Talladega. Who is the voice I hear on the NASCAR officials channel that gives the directions and whatnot?
Oh, I answered my boy here.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah. I saw you weren't doing it, so I was like, hey, I guess I better.
You didn't tag me. That's what happened. You didn't tag me in your response.
It was So on the officials channel, I think you can get it on the NASCAR app, but you can hear it if you're at the racetrack wearing one of the racing electronics radios. I highly recommend doing that. It definitely adds to the experience. But yeah, if you have a scanner, I'm not sure if Max has an officials channel. I don't think so.
I don't know. We'll have to check.
So, but if you have scanner audio, there is the official channel, and that is going to be the race director. So that is either going to be on Saturday and Sunday. It was Tim Berman, or it could be Jason Hamilton, who has also been a guest on Hauler Talk, or it could be Chase Brashears, who has now officially been a guest on Hauler Talk. So it's one of those three gentlemen, and they like you've heard, have set the lineups, call the cautions, call out the penalties, things like that over the radio. So it's a pretty good listen to really get a feel, and that's what we listen to all race long too. So we know what's going on from a NASCAR perspective.
And I'll add, because we're kind of discussing being at the track and hearing what you may hear, is if you're at the racetrack and you don't necessarily have a headset that you're listening to the officials channel or maybe your favorite driver channel, you also might have the opportunity to hear what is referenced as like NASCAR TV. So that is the programs that run on the big screens. So during on-track activity, they often pop in for conversations, pop in for interviews, I should say, during cautions and stage breaks, but then also like pre-race and all, they're showing a bunch of, activity at the track, or they might show some sizzle reels or interviews with drivers that they've pre-recorded. And that is available at I think majority of the races, especially all the Cup races. And that is something else you might hear along with the track announcer. Sometimes you will hear the track announcer who is essentially calling the race or giving commentary to the race from their perspective as well. So that's an example of a couple of the different voices you can hear if you're attending a race. And like Forde said, cool thing about our sport is you can hear the officials channel. And if you need more information on that, I know there is a link on NASCAR.com that will help you get access to that. And then the second question was related to, and we actually didn't dive too much into this today, Forde, so maybe we'll swing back around and do this on a upcoming episode. But on Friday, we showed the part from the 2 appeal. We won the appeal. NASCAR won the appeal. So once that appeal was finished, we displayed the part, I guess is the proper term, to the media, and our series director of the NASCAR Xfinity Series, Eric Peterson, took the media kind of through the process and ultimately why that part was found to be illegal. And you might have seen some videos from that. So this question comes from Matt Long, and his question was, when they do these demonstrations like this, are parts forever in possession of the series, or in this case, because it's not a modified part but in an incorrect assembly of a series of parts, do we release those possessions back so that the team can reuse them later?
Yeah, it depends. So for instance, we will so the deck lid from the 22 car, once we wrap up with our media briefing and displaying the part for any teams that want to go see it, they'll get that part back. And as far as the RCR assembly for the number 2 team, I believe they get that back too. If it's a part that is, we feel, modified, or even if we lose or win the appeal, they will not get that back. We'll keep that, and we've talked about, I don't know if they still put those parts pieces back into that illegal cage in the R&D center that we've talked about, or what they do with it.
Well, there's still parts up there.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly if they eventually
So, for instance,
make it up there,
the
or-
19 part, even though the appeal was over, or the penalty was overturned upon appeal, that the JGR didn't get that part back because it is still an illegal part.
And those parts are tagged.
Yeah.
And essentially categorized in a computer, but then they're also tagged, like physically tagged, and we hold on to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
My
I think,
understanding with the jokingly the cage, when next gen became what it is, which is, you know, the next gen car that we currently compete with, a lot of those parts that had been up there for years and years and years and years don't really apply quite like they did because of the next gen car and the single source parts and things that go along with that. So in that case, we did return some of those parts to the organizations, got rid of some of them, kind of went through a process of making room because the R&D center needed some room too. And I think that was a little bit of that process. So some of those parts have been kind of distributed, but ultimately, as we still collect parts, they are held at the R&D center.
Yeah, I think the sort of line of delineation on whether they get it back or not is if it was modified. If it can be used again legally, then they get it back. If it can't be used again legally, then we keep them.
All right, Matt, Allen, thank you so much for your questions. Please keep those questions coming. Like we say, we love answering them and want to continue to do so. So that's it. Another one in the books.
It was good. It was a good. Feel good. Feel good.
Yeah,
I
like you just worked
I give
out
us
a little bit.
B plus. It was good. It was good. We got to talk about Denny Hamlin again, so that always makes me feel good.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining. We always appreciate it. Like we said at the top of the show, we are now on YouTube. Check out the NASCAR YouTube page. You can see us there. As always, M. Forde and Amanda M. Ellis on X. Our good friend Nate Ryan. He's on Facebook. You guys know where to find him. And we appreciate when you guys send us notes and engage with us throughout the week. So that's it for today. Hauler Talk's officially in the books, and we'll see you guys next week.
See you, everybody.